in India, the whole wealth effect has taken in last 10 odd years, and there is a lot of structure to wealth now in this segment of the market. Investing in experiences is catching up in a big way in India, and the reason why it was not the case is that the wealthy predominantly were asset heavy, cash flow light. So technology is a enabler. You have to look at it from that standpoint, and it is only helping the cause of how people are able to manage their portfolio at the click of a button. There is a change with respect to these investors investing heavily in real estate a couple of years back. Now that money is gradually moving into financial assets. Private credit is a big part of allocation, which typically wealthy investors look at.
Where do India's wealthy invest? I'm sure this is a question that's often crossed your mind. Do they have that added advantage or the extra edge or some information arbitrage that's lacking for the rest of us? Hi everyone, I'm Mubina Kapasi, and today on Lighthouse Canton's Ideas podcast, I have with me none other than Lighthouse Canton's India CEO, Sumegh Bhatia. Hi Sumegh, and I think it puts you at a vantage point, right? Because at LC India, what are you guys managing? I mean, what's the number for Indian wealthy people?
So, see, we are a global wealth firm, and wealth is only one part of the business we do, but predominantly a wealth firm. So, 10-year-old managing around $4 billion of assets.
That's worldwide.
Yeah, and predominantly managing a lot of family offices in Asia. Started in India at a time when things were looking really bleak, 2020, but have actually seen green shoots in how we have built the India business. So that has been a journey, very exciting. India now, multiple businesses, wealth is a part of it, and we are growing.
Really, I mean, it's a very big part of LC as a whole.
Yeah.
India's wealthy. I mean, you'd imagine that this is a country that's still developing, but you've managed to accumulate $2 billion, in terms of AUM or in terms of the monies you're managing for wealthy Indian families. So tell us, how are they approaching this whole topic of wealth management? And I think it becomes a more tricky topic for them, because it's not that, earning money, of course, is difficult, but ensuring that you're growing that earned money and preserving that money for your future generations is even more difficult.
Sure.
So share with us a little bit of those conversations you have with them.
Sure, absolutely. So, see, wealthy is a very broad terminology we use, and in India, fortunately, we have clientele in different segments of the market, and every segment is a very different market in itself. So if I look at wealthy predominantly, and how do you define wealthy? Wealthy is someone who's sort of done and dusted with the fire piece, right? That's wealthy, right? And in India, I think if you look at the number, that number can be anything between $500,000 to $1 million, which is also a global number, which is, I think, how people define even wealthy in markets like US and all, which is mother of all markets. But outside of this definition, there is HNI, which is anything between anything upwards of 1 million to 5 million, and then there is ultra HNI, which is 5 million to 30 million. And then there is super HNI, which is the super rich, which is anything upwards of $30 million. So every segment of the market looks at wealth in a very different way.
Okay.
Right. So, as we go more deeper in our conversation, I can actually give you a little sense on how different people look at wealth in a different manner.
So let's do that. And I would be interested in the super HNI to begin with. I'm sure only you are, so am I. How do they look at wealth?
So see, fortunately, in India, the whole wealth effect has taken in last, 10 odd years. And there is a lot of structure to wealth now in this segment of the market. Predominantly, this wealth was brick and mortar promoters, large listed companies. And over a course of last few years, promoters of these companies have sort of differentiated their personal wealth to the corporate wealth, right? Which is how the companies are doing and how they are doing as individuals. So that's how they have started looking at, creating some separate pool of capital. This part of wealth is still concentrated to tier 1 cities, right? Tier 1, tier 2 cities. The structural part of this wealth, which is how you put a structure to a wealth.
Okay.
Tier 2, tier 3 cities onwards, there is this wealth, but it is not put in a very structured manner. That is the reason why you have also seen the advent of multifamily offices. People like us who actually talk to these rich, wealthy individuals and or families and advise them what to do. How to put a structure to this. Yeah.
When you say structured, you mean that the folks perhaps in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities have not really yet created that family office which comes to rich investments, and that's where you step in.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So you help them create that structure.
So this is predominantly, your typical promoters of listed companies or people who have gone in money. Apparently, there is a new segment of this market, which is, promoters of unlisted companies who have come in money by either selling some part of their businesses or selling their full businesses and now 100% managing their wealth through family offices.
I see.
That is one part of the market which is going to explode like how, because that is where a lot of action is also happening in India.
And I think many of these unlisted guys are exploring the primary market in India too.
Yeah.
So I guess we should be seeing that.
And we also get to see a lot of this is because of our, the asset management business, what we run out of India, which is, early stage investing. We do debt to late stage companies or mid stage companies, which is through a venture debt fund. We run a capital market business in India, which is predominantly helping a lot of these companies preparing for IPOs at some point in time in the future. So there are a lot of promoters we interact with there on that side of the business. So we are seeing a lot of this action also happening in this space.
And now, of course, most of these unlisted companies are also hitting the primary markets. They're going for IPOs and all of that. So I think that's something that also you will be seeing a lot.
Absolutely. We are already seeing a lot of wealth creation happening on that side and profitable companies, not as if, while few of these companies have been non-profitable, but, as they have come to market, they have also turned profitable in the subsequent quarters. So there is a lot of action happening in that space.
All right. Like you mentioned, even the whole wealthy bucket has a lot of sub-buckets, if I could call it that, subcategories. Do you see this marked difference in the way that they are looking at how they want to grow their wealth? Perhaps there's a category that's very aggressive with this kind of returns they want from their portfolio. Then there'd be a category that will say that, look, I have been there, done that, fought the fires, like you said.
Yes.
And now they just want to preserve it.
Yeah.
So how do you see these different categories approach the return philosophy?
Actually, very interesting. This is how we have been kind of looking at different segments of the market. So the segment which is the HNI segment, HNI and the ultra HNI segment, that segment predominantly is a very growth oriented investing. They follow a very growth investing style because that is how the undertone of the Indian economy is, right? That you are here in India to generate wealth, right? That is the thesis of being an emerging market, kind of. So that segment is very growth oriented. A good thing that has happened in that segment is that initially that segment was predominantly investing in everything that was coming their alley, right? So they were like investing in insurances, they were investing into some products which were not helping them to generate that sort of a wealth. But now with the advent of a lot of wealth tech, what we have seen in India, they have given a structure or maybe a consolidation to that wealth as well. So they are seeing a lot of inputs coming from these platforms to how to build that portfolio for that segment of the market. But the undertone still remains growth, right? Because they are in that, situation of creating wealth or building their portfolio, right? But the way we look at, or, to answer the other segments, to come to the other segments of the market, which is predominantly super rich and the family office, the structured family office or a multi-family office or even a single family offices. There, as you said, it's absolutely right. The money is already made, right? And the undertone there is preservation, global diversification, right? Absolute return orientation. So that is how the differentiation happens. So that is the reason why, many times when I even look at the broader players in the market, it is very, very important that every player picks a niche, what segment of the market they want to operate in, right? Because then you are actually doing a better justice to the segment of the market you are servicing to.
So considering that your HNIs and UHNIs want that growth because they're in an emerging market, etc., would I be correct in saying that their appetite for risk is also much higher compared to super HNIs?
So, absolutely. HNI and ultra HNIs, because of a nature of being in emerging markets like India, having growth orientation, they look at their portfolios little bit more aggressively. And a lot of these investors are also, they have not seen market cycles, right? Which is also very important because, see, if anyone who has come in wealth, let's say in last 10 years, 15 years, would have seen one or two market cycles or even one market cycle. And I'm not even sure a lot of, what percentage of these people would have seen all those 3-4 market cycles, what we have seen in last 20, 25 years. So their definition of risk sometimes is even not understandable at their end, that what is the risk we are running. It is only when, the events happen, then they start to realize that, oh my God, if the portfolio is now down 20% or 25%, 30%, in some cases we have even seen during COVID times, 50-60% fall. That is a time then they start to have a little more reality check or introspection. Is that how they want to really take their journey of wealth creation going forward? My suggestion predominantly to these set of investors is that it is very, very important to define the drawdowns you can take as an investor, right? And then build a portfolio accordingly. Even as a firm, while we also run a wealth tech practice in India, but whenever we are talking to such investors, our starting point is drawdowns. While yes, all of us are here to build portfolio for a longer period of time or to create wealth, but what is the wealth destruction you can see on this portfolio, right? And you would be comfortable with. It answers, I think, if you are able to define that at the start of a conversation or maybe start of the whole investment process, things get a little bit better because then you start understanding risk much better.
Now, LC, of course, is a global brand. You have, you interact with the wealthy from all over the world, not just India. Do you think that the investment goals, the priorities with which wealthy Indians invest or approach their wealth is different from the wealthy of other countries?
Not now. Maybe yes, a couple of years back, 15 years back, 20 years back. But a lot of wealthy in tier 1 cities these days, they are so well traveled. A lot of wealthy in the markets, the tier 1 markets in India, they are, even their second and third generations, they are foreign educated. So they have come back to India. So there is not much of a difference between how a wealthy look at wealth outside India and how a wealthy look at wealth inside India or inside our country. The only difference, at least I have seen in few cases, is that in multiple conversations I have been party to with my teams. Globally, and there is a lot of money we also invest for Indian investors globally, through LRS and through other options. Globally, things are little bit more derivative in nature. The portfolios are a little bit aligned to derivative part of the market. In India, it is more simpler asset allocation, or in a sense, simpler products. So that's the only difference. Apart from that, if I can just think of few more, philanthropy is not a big deal in India right now. Very few families look at that, or very few clients look at that. Globally, it is relatively main stage. Investing in experiences is catching up in a big way in India.
Correct.
Which was not the case. And the reason why it was not the case is that in India, investors or promoters or the family offices or whosoever you want to define it, the wealthy predominantly, were asset heavy, cash flow light, which is also changing. Now they have started realizing in no point being too much asset heavy, have too much of fixed assets, which is not generating cash flows. So once you have that situation, that they have started realizing that the cash flow is a very important component of their well-being. Everything else, because once you start getting cash flows, your lifestyle changes. You would want to invest in experiences, you want to do philanthropy, you want to do multiple other things. So that is how the India wealthy is evolving in the last 10 years at least, what I have seen. Before that, not much. I think there was too much of a differentiation between how a wealthy look at investing, or a wealthy was looking at wealth in India, and how wealthy was looking at wealth outside India.
I think it's so amazing what you've mentioned. We were previously allocated as spending. You're spending on philanthropy, you're spending on maybe travel or whatever experiences are there, but you're using the term investing. So largely investing in the traditional sense of the term, we are out there. We are at par with our global peers, and we have that maturity of how to build our wealth. And now it's more about investing in the experiential part of it, So that's a very interesting point of view that you've brought about. Let's talk about now, where are we investing? Because at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants to know. I mean, do these wealthy people have that edge, or do they know something that the non-wealthy don't know? So I think the key thing over here is to understand, where are they investing and how are they investing? If you could share some insights on that.
So a lot of wealthy investors, as I said, India undertone is growth. There is a change with respect to these investors investing heavily in real estate a couple of years back, and now that money is gradually moving into financial assets, and all of us know about that whole transition that has happened to wealthy investors in India. So financial assets, wealthy have started looking at financial assets in a big way. Within that a bucket, equity still remains their most favorable asset class. Wealthy are very, very conscious on taxation, right? And also these are surpluses, right? It is not the money, it's not their savings. They want to keep it in instrument they can just pull out whenever there is a requirement. These are surpluses. So their view on investing is little long term, for 5 years, 10 years, predominantly. So equity remains very favorable. And when I say equity, look at any derivative of equity, whether it is hedge funds or it is alternate investment funds, everything. These are all underlying derivatives of investing in equity markets, right? Wherein there is, you can invest through a PMS, you can invest through a mutual fund, you can invest through hedge funds, depending upon how much risk you want to build in your portfolio. But it is equity predominantly. Debt has taken a little bit of a backseat because of the new tax regime. It is not favorable now to invest in debt. So, and alternatively, they have started looking at alternate asset classes, right? Which has replaced debt, in last couple of years. Now, within the alternate asset classes, there is income generating asset classes like venture debt or private credit. It is a lot of families look at these very, very favorably because it solves for two things. One, the volatility of these products are pretty low. Second, there is a regular cash flow. So that also helps them sustain a certain lifestyle. If, because if let's say there is a family office would want to have some cash flows so that the expenses of the family office is well taken care of.
Correct.
That is where the whole experience thing also comes into play. So these are also few asset classes within the alternate space investors look at. Third, if I can maybe think of, is global investing. As I said, they have surpluses and they have also experience investing in India for last few years.
Yeah.
Right. Some people even have a 10, 15, 20 years experience because, they have had that wealth for pretty long period of time. There they are looking at now globally diversifying these assets. Now, predominantly, this was real estate, even global real estate.
Okay.
Which is also now in last couple of years have started moving to financial portfolios globally. And it's very easy to invest in India also now because, you can take an exposure to S&P, NASDAQ and all that, even sitting out of India, GIFT City, so on and so forth. So global diversification is taking some part of these portfolios. And it is only going to stay and only going to increase over a period of next couple of years.
So real estate basically as a part of a wealthy investor's portfolio is coming down. Are they basically liquidating their real estate assets and then putting them in financial assets? And how much? I mean, are we say maybe like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, maybe 40% was in real estate and 60% in the other financial assets. So if you could share that ratio too.
Actually, very interesting. Your real estate investing in India predominantly has been residential real estate. People were buying multiple houses.
Correct.
And even today, you speak to any wealthy in India, they would have a couple of houses.
Correct.
If someone lives in Delhi or someone lives in Bombay, they would have a couple of houses there. They would have a house in Goa. They will have a house in some hill station, depending on what part of India you are living. They will also now have a house in London, or they will have a house in Middle East.
Yeah.
But as you transition from an HNI to a family office, and I'm seeing this happening because HNIs also, or ultra HNIs, at some point in time, once the wealth cross a certain threshold, they also want to have a structured family office, which is helping them, put a structure to their wealth. As this is now gradually moving to family office side of things, income generating assets have taken a little bit more precedence over, residential assets.
Yeah.
So you would see a lot of super wealthy clients in India, specifically in, let's say, Mumbai or maybe Delhi, or even markets like Bangalore, and they would own multiple commercial assets which are generating income for them. Also, at some point in time, these assets are sort of the pool of assets becomes larger. There is global capital which is available to come and buy out these assets, right?
Okay.
Because they are very hungry for yield. So they also look at commercial in a big way. Now they have started looking at commercial. See, it's very difficult for someone who's been heavily invested into fixed assets to tell them to, overnight change the portfolio from fixed assets to financial assets. It takes time, right? New money, yes, goes into financial assets, but traditional money, which is still predominantly invested into fixed assets, there the transition has been from residential to commercial, and then from that income they are generating out of commercial, that has gone into financial assets, and that is how they have been building their portfolio.
Let's talk a bit more about alternative investments that you mentioned, venture debt, private credit, possibly even art collectibles, etc., right? How could you just describe a bit more about that, and what's the interest in all of these alternative investments? Because see, these are still relatively newer. Are the wealthy being a bit more hesitant yet, or do you think that they want to go out there and grab any new investable opportunity that exists?
At least I have not seen wealthy being hesitant in looking at these asset classes. And there is so much that is happening in this space right now. Even there is a new category of SIFs which is just got launched by SEBI. So when you say alternate investment funds, obviously there are multiple categories, category 1, 2, 3. So let's, for the purpose of this conversation, let's keep our discussion to category 2 and category 3, because that's where the maximum money is. Between these two categories, and I am also taking within the category 3, there are simple long only equity products which are nothing but derivative of a PMS or a mutual fund. So I'm also not taking that into consideration. The only reason why a lot of people look at those is that they don't want to get into a hassle of opening up those PMS accounts and so on and so forth. And AIFs becomes little alternate investment funds on the equity side becomes a little easier to execute. But within the Cat 2 and Cat 3, there is so much to offer now to wealthy investors that you can actually define risk of a wealthy investor or a family, how they want to look at risk, and you can actually target a right product which can fit into their portfolios. I think if I can just pick up 2, 3 which are most relevant right now, private credit is a big part of allocation, which what typically wealthy investors look at. Solves two reasons, and I've already spoken about it. One, cash flows. They look at cash flows, and these are high double-digit sort of yields that get offered to these investors. And they also look at this as part of their fixed income allocation. So private credit is here to stay. Private credit as a product will only grow in India. So apart from private credit, if I look at the other most attractive asset class is private equity.
Okay.
Now, a lot of wealthy investors, depending upon what segment they operate in, super HNI, super wealthy, they look at private equity as, now they have started looking at private equity as risk investment, right? They will allocate some part of the portfolio into investing into private equity. That can be standalone holdings, that can be also investing through funds. HNI and ultra HNI investors look at private equity as diversification to their portfolio, because there are a lot of great funds in India you can actually have exposure to, wherein you can invest into a lot of these companies which are unlisted right now, and the multiple associated with these companies are much higher than typically in a cycle, in 10-year cycle, to end up doing better than predominantly public markets. And there are a lot of these funds in this space which investors look at. Third category of alternate investment funds, if I may talk about, which is category 3, is hedge funds. Again, great risk mitigation, products which can be fitted into client portfolios depending upon how you want to, what part of the portfolio you want to, mitigate risk at an overall level, right? So, when you get into a conversation of what is the drawdown you can take in a portfolio, many times that number can also be achieved by having some part of the portfolio allocated to hedge funds. And hedge funds, again, in India has become a very, main stage sort of investing, as what it was, I think, a couple of years back. There were not many good managers who were managing this part of the market.
Okay. Let's talk about technology. I mean, it's all pervasive. It's something that has driven a lot of retail Indian investors to equity markets to explore new products. How has it influenced the wealthy? If at all it has influenced, of course, that's the first question. And if it has, then how has it influenced their investment making decisions?
So technology is a enabler. You have to look at it from that standpoint. And it is only helping the cause of how people are able to manage their portfolio at the click of a button. So if you look at wealthy investors in India, you go back 10, 15 years, if you ask them what is your net worth, right? It was very difficult for that person to give an answer immediately, right? Someone, I have FDs in these banks, I have some money lying in saving accounts, I have some real estate, or I have some stocks which are lying in some demat somewhere. So there was not much of a consolidation piece engine that was available for a lot of wealthy investors to look at. It's that today, how much am I worth? So in the first, I would say, evolution of technology in India, everyone has tried to solve the consolidation piece, right? That today, if I think I'm wealthy, how much money I have, or how much money I have not only in financial assets, but everywhere. It can be my insurance policies also. It can be even my money in some NPS, or maybe in some fixed deposits, or in any previous investments I have made. So technology in the first place has solved for consolidation, which is a very, very strong tool given in the hand of a wealthy investor.
Yeah.
Right? Because their assets are, anything which is $1 million and above is okay to track, right? Now, second part of technology is so the consolidation has happened. What next? Second part of technology, which is still evolving, and that is where our wealth tech comes in play, and that is how we are looking at wealth tech in a big way, is analytics.
Okay.
Right? How can you put analytics to what you hold in your portfolio, and how quickly you can act on that analytics? So third part is the execution.
Okay.
Till consolidation, there are a lot of players in the market, even as we speak today, right? A lot of new firms have come, and they have provided those consolidation engines wherein, you can actually see your portfolio, your wealth in a click of a button. There are very few players who do the analytical part. Analytical part, even today, is driven by one-on-one engagement. You have your bankers coming in to meet you. You have, the investment team of that firm also accompanying a banker to meet a client, and so on and so forth. This analytical tool will become very large as the technology evolves, as AI evolves, as you have multiple data points to look at. So that is how it is evolving, right? But it is a good direction how technology is moving in India, and this is also globally. It's moving in the same way globally.
So when do HNIs, UHNIs, and perhaps even the super HNIs from the smaller towns, or tier 2, tier 3 towns, come to you to set up the multifamily office? At what stage do they realize that, okay, this is needed?
By and large, if it is, it's the size of the money, right? It's how much typical wealth anyone is sitting on. And when I say wealth, I'm excluding the fixed asset part of it. I am only talking about financial wealth. And also how complex that wealth has sort of become, of the portfolio, how complex the portfolio has become. So in my assessment, the right number is 50 crores for anyone to look at working with a multifamily office.
All right. Now let's talk about why a multifamily office. You mentioned that when it gets more complex, when of course the number, it's a simple number figure as well. So what are the benefits that getting structured, coming to somebody like Elsie and setting up that multi-family office brings to wealthy Indians?
So there are predominantly three benefits I can talk about immediately. One is the whole consolidation, execution, and analytics engine that a multifamily office provides to such investors. Life becomes really easy when you start using technology, and it is very difficult to build all this on your own, right? There are not many tools available in India or globally which helps you to do that. So the consolidation, analytics, and execution part of technology helps in anyone to manage wealth much better. Second, talent. Today, if I am a wealthy investor, I would have to deal with multiple relationships I would have. It can be banks, it can be other financial institutions, so on and so forth. What a multifamily office does multifamily office come as a filter between these relationships and start representing a client, right? And the only reason a multifamily office is able to represent the client better is because the multifamily office is on client side, right? The multifamily office is understanding the requirements of a client much better. And it is very difficult for a client to explain these requirements to everyone that individual or a family is talking to. So then it becomes much easier for multifamily office to engage with, the multiple touch points, the client. And to do that, you need a set of very, very talented and experienced people. It's very difficult to hire such people, such talent on your own as individuals. And, that is also how you have seen it, how things have evolved in last couple of years. Majority of the wealthy in India predominantly were promoters of, let's say, large companies. So how it used to get structured is that, I am a promoter of a large company. I have a CFO who's managing the finances of my firm. One part of that role, what the CFO was also doing, is also managing my own personal money, whatever I had.
Yeah.
I think that is where the whole problem was, that someone with a very different mindset is managing a personal wealth for a promoter and not even understanding what the actual end requirement of that client is. So that transition is actually happening to multifamily offices, and that is where it should get transitioned to multifamily office, because these are specialized people, specialized talent. Within the multifamily office, you have tech talent, you have economists, you have market people who understand public markets, people who understand private markets, people who understand credit, right? People who understand multiple other asset classes, the new age asset classes. So it's very difficult for someone sitting in the promoter's office to understand everything. It's a very specialized offering, what you do in multifamily office. And also, I think the last part is cost optimization. Today, if you have to hire such talent on your own, and that is the reason why, as I said, there is a certain ticket size or certain value you should look at when you are starting dealing with multifamily office. And at some point in time, you should look to set up your own single family office. Because, till the time your portfolio size is that large that you are able to justify the cost, right? You should definitely look at transitioning it to a single family office. But till the time that's not there, multifamily office is a much better platform to work with, because it brings a lot of these efficiencies with respect to cost optimization, using the right talent, technology as offering what a multifamily office does.
So we've spoken a lot about where the wealthy invest and how they invest. Let's speak about now how did they become wealthy in the first place and where are they living? So firstly, more often than not, or in your interactions, what is the source of the wealth?
We are a growing country. The economy is growing, and there is so much of action that's happening within India. What I have seen in last couple of years is predominantly companies getting listed.
Okay.
Promoters do get some part of exit when the companies get listed. Even listed companies at some point in time, some part of profits that get generated on listed companies get paid out as dividends to promoters. So that's one segment. Second segment is professionals. People who are the CXOs of these large companies. There is this huge culture of now, making senior leadership as stakeholders in the company, right? So, and every time a company goes through the whole cycle of going to capital markets and raising money and becoming a publicly listed company, it is not only benefiting a promoter, it is benefiting to a lot of other people as well. So that is also where the wealth creation has happened, right? A lot of people who were CXOs and part of the leadership of these companies did get benefited. Third is the whole liquidity events which are happening in the private market space. So a lot of private equity funds, the buyout funds, global funds, they are looking at investing in India. And a lot of mid-stage, late-stage companies do get, the promoters get opportunities wherein some cash outs that can happen in the journey of these companies. So that is also where a lot of action is happening. If you define the locations, it's predominantly top 5-6 cities in India, because that is where a lot of this stuff is happening, whether it is exits out of listing a company or private equity coming into these companies. So you can think of all these large 5-6 cities we have in India. So that is where
Mumbai,
Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, Pune, Ahmedabad. These are predominantly the cities wherein you have seen a lot of wealth emerging.
The profile of the wealthy Indian has changed a lot. I mean, traditionally we've imagined them to be, a 50-plus-year-old male, but today we have 20-year-old males or females who are classified as billionaires. How are you dealing with something like that?
So they are much smarter with respect to what they want out of life. And if you look at how they look at their wealth is very different to how a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old wealthy investor looks at the wealth. There is a lot of difference between the risk metrics.
Okay.
A young, wealthy, promoter individual who's seen money, the risk appetite is very, very high.
Okay.
Because the money is being made by taking those, calls of setting up something which has eventually worked, right? So the risk appetite is actually very, very high. By and large, the risk appetite of a 50-60-year-old promoter is little lesser as compared to the younger promoters. So for a person like me at my age and experience and stage of life, sizable part still remains in equities, public, private. Because I am also a very high risk taker, and as I said, sizable part of my wealth is also paper wealth. Yeah. There is a sizable part which also is in private markets.
Okay.
Global diversification, again because of global equity exposure. Very, very little debt, allocation to debt or fixed income. That is how I am structured right now.
I would be amiss in not asking you, honestly, this question, considering that we've spoken all about how you're managing the wealth for so many other wealthy Indians. And I think this was a very insightful conversation because I'm sure it's something that many Indians have pondered upon, that how do that top 1% or perhaps even a smaller percentage, top 0.5% invest. So thank you so much, Sumekh, for a very insightful conversation.
Pleasure is all mine. It was great having conversation with you.
Well, lots of interesting insights on how the wealthy invest and also how important it is to structure the wealth via multifamily offices. If you'd like to know more about multifamily offices, you can log on to Lighthouse Canton's website where you'd find all of those interesting blogs and articles. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening in to the Lighthouse Canton Ideas podcast. We hope you found this conversation insightful. Subscribe and tune in for more episodes. This podcast has been prepared by Lighthouse Canton Private Limited and all its affiliates for informational purposes only. There is nothing contained in this podcast that constitutes advisory services. This podcast shall in no event constitute or be considered as advised to invest in any specific investment or investment class, vehicle, or financial instrument. The information contained in this podcast shall not be considered as legal, tax, financial, or other advice. You should consult a professional to obtain specific advice regarding the financial, legal, regulatory, tax, and other regulations applicable to you. You should consult a financial advisor authorized in your jurisdiction before making any investment decision to ensure that you fully understand the products and potential risks involved.